Today's guest is a true visionary, Sophia Demirtas, the founder and creative force behind the fashion and lifestyle brand Fanm Mon. Born of personal expression, global perspective, and cultural memory, Sophia's work is rich with layers of meaning and steeped in a sense of beauty. In our conversation, we talk about how her life, rooted in multiple cultures and shaped by her travels and family, has inspired every part of the Fanm Mon brand. From how it operates to how it honors heritage while feeling entirely modern, this episode is a dive into design with heart, spirit, and story. Let's get started. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host of the Grandma Silver podcast and founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma Silver. All right, well, Sophia, I'm so excited to have the opportunity to chat with you today. I want to give you the opportunity to tell people who you are and what your brand is.
Thank you for having me, first of all, Allie. My name is Sophia Demirtas, and I am the creative director of Fanm Mon.
Tell everyone, because we were just talking a little bit about your brand name. There's a story behind that. There's a meaning behind that. So could you start there and tell people what that is and what it means to you?
Having been raised by my grandmother, I truly consider that one of the greatest gifts because I not only was really loved and nurtured, but I was also really very early exposed to the strength and the power of these Fanm Mon. So my grandma, who was a herbalist in her own right, she was not a coffee drinker, but like a really deep, hardcore tea drinker. So she was really ingrained into ensuring everything that she takes is somewhat beneficial, health wise. So she really surrounded herself with these village women, with these farmers, with these sort of like caretakers, because she understood there was something really special and something really unique there. They really had an understanding of nature. They really had an understanding of just really of the abundance of self healing that was really provided through the herbs and really understood how to put them to use. So whether they learned that from their moms or their moms learned it from their grandmothers and grandpas. So it was really a lot of information that was passed down. And I think for some extent, my grandmother also had a similar upbringing because I was very fortunate to know my great grandmother. In her old years, my grandmother actually cared for her. And they're coming from the southern parts of Haiti, which is a very, till this day, it's probably the greenest part of the island. It's called Jérémie. It's very dense and lush, like have beautiful bays and all of that, but it's really like the wild and untapped nature that really draws me to that. And I'm fortunate that that's where my sort of like lineage is from. So my grandmother, even though she left Jérémie when she was really young, I think she left Jérémie, if I'm not mistaken, either at 10 or 13 years old. She went into the city. She adapted and became sort of like the city woman, but the village and the Fanm Mon in her was always, very present, which is why she always referred back to nature to kind of like to heal any and everything. Like if she says ouch, she was doing something already. So it was really fortunate to not only be raised by her with her own knowledge, but to also see how she embraced these Fanm Mon, these sort of like countryside farmers, women, and sometimes men who pretty much had this connection to nature. That was our source of foods. So they would really harvest everything from different parts of Haiti. Like everyone would grow, like there's a part that kind of like focuses on growing certain crops. Another one is growing rice. Another one is making the herbs. So every part is kind of like known for their thing. And my grandma seemed to have had, sort of like an intel, like a connection with everyone, because from the food that she ate to the teas that she drank to the sort of like bottle concoctions that were prepared, they were all coming from all these fully knowledgeable people who are from the countryside. That the name, I know that was like a very lengthy explanation
No,
there,
I
but
loved that. Oh, that's so informative.
thank you. So the name, it really resonates because I haven't had that exposure. I truly understand how invaluable these people were to my country, to my nation. But unfortunately, it doesn't have like the best meaning in Creole because if you're being referred to as a Fanm Mon, if there's like a stigma that's attached to it as you not being sort of like this exposed, well-educated, sort of like modern woman. And everyone is really kind of using that as a how you say that word? Is it
Derogatory.
derogatory? Thank you. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like using that to maybe belittle someone just by looking at them on the surface without really seeing the core value that they really embody with their connection and knowledge of nature. So I initially named myself someone. That was the name that I kind of like lounged on Facebook with. And everyone was just kind of like really, it was mind boggling that out of all the names that I could choose to identify with, that was the name that I chose. So it went on for a couple of years or more where I had to really kind of like explain to people, Haitians, who are like, well, you don't look like a Fanm Mon to me. Why are you calling yourself a Fanm Mon? You're educated. You're kind of like in New York. There's no reference there. And I'm like, well, if you're looking on the surface, and that's the mistake that I would say a lot of us in our culture make. Like you look at her on the surface and you already devalue all the knowledge that she embodies. And then you're looking at me on the surface and you're kind of like you're telling me how I cannot possibly be that. So it's like we have to really go a little bit more in depth. And I guess my friends finally got it because once they started paying so much attention to what I was doing as far as my innate knowledge, my really early exposure to these nutritional ways of consuming food. So, I left New York and moved to Turkey. So that was really a way that I stayed in touch with a lot of my friends and family. So when they started paying attention to the type of tea that I was making or to the type of food that I was preparing, and they never, they rarely hear of me complaining of being sick, then everyone they wanted in, they wanted to understand, like, I'm feeling this way, what can I take? So I really became this, reference point for everyone who maybe was even diagnosed with something and didn't necessarily want to just start taking medicine. They wanted to kind of like, then they remembered in a way like they had this, like they had this root, like they're Haitian, like you could go to the herbs, you could go to these sort of like meals. And it's also very interesting how, a lot of us, we're kind of like we're looking at the fruit as the source of nutrients, and we don't really pay attention to the barks, we don't pay attention to the leaves, we don't pay attention to all of that. And for me, it's really like even from the root of the plant to the every singular leaf on the plant at every stage, I want to have an understanding of how it could be beneficial to me. And that curiosity stems from these Fanm Mons, because they would know specifically which part of the tree to make like a bottle concoction with. They would know which part of the tree, if you put it in a bottle, it would be, useful for that part or for that sickness. And if you take the leaf at that stage, it's beneficial to that. So I'm just very fortunate to have that love for nature and to really even be more fortunate to have it really passed down to me in such a pure way.
You have said so many things that I have questions about and that I want to call out. But the first is I just want to make sure I'm understanding fully. So, Fanm Mon essentially is sort of like a natural healer, someone who's connected to the earth,
Yeah.
and culturally is seen as perhaps a lower tier of society, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because are the ones who they farm, they would get these foods and go bring it to the market to sell.
Okay.
So it's
Yep.
just about the healing. And some of them, they're kind of like they're the midwives in their whole town. Like literally every baby running around was delivered by them or someone, in their family. So there's like so much more. that they do. But also there's the men's version, which is called Negmon. So it's really all these people, as we refer to these people of Odoyo, these people that are kind of like from the countryside or the village side, that really, in my opinion, really carries and pushes the nation, because if they don't grow their crop, you will not feed. If you get sick, particularly in Haiti's situation, there is not readily available hospitals everywhere. So everyone goes to that bush person, that Fanm Mon, that Negmon in their town to heal them in one way or another for some issue or another. Yet they're just kind of like they're really depreciated.
That's so fascinating because it's almost the reverse of how we see things here, right? Like doctors and people in the medical field are so revered in the United States.
They don't have a certificate they could put on a wall. Even if you just look at the food chain, even if you wanted to call them farmers, because they naturally have that knowledge as well. I grew up in New York. I used to go to, the farmers market, when they're having it on Saturdays, by the Brooklyn Library, or if I go to 14th Street. Like, I don't go and look down on these farmers because they're farmers. You know what I mean? And it's also interesting, like someone who would come from Haiti, they would go and buy with these farmers and be very happy. But the interaction with those very same farmers or Fumons or Negmons within their own countries, it's somewhat different. For me, I really want the sacredness of the name to really highlight this really jewel of people that we have within our nation. I think now the name has become popular and people kind of like see it more as a brand name, but I still really much welcome and look forward to having, like a Haitian or even another Caribbean person who kind of understand what the name means to pull me into a dialogue. I really like having these type of conversations that really hones in the name of the brand.
Well, first of all, it's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with me. My background is anthropology, so I love learning about culture. And I mean, you're speaking my love language right now.
One of the things that really set us apart, particularly around the COVID, period, was really people seeing like this is not, I'm not just here like focusing on trying to make pretty dresses. Like this is really who I am. This is my lifestyle, and this is truly how I function and operate. Like I don't just kind of like choose colors and make color combinations just for it. I really want to have that sort of balance component in everything that I create, because we are tapping into feminine energy, and I want my clothing to truly speak to that and to truly represent that. And if it's not necessarily a tea recipe or like anything like that that I'm doing, I would want you to at least, if it's a clothing that you're getting from me that connects you or that makes you curious, I want you to receive it and for it to make you feel good. And I know that sounds like a cliche, because there are so many brands out there. But, given the fact that I do get these feedbacks of how people feel super good and super happy about the dress, I know that that really in many ways sets us apart.
I think what's so special about that, and this kind of segues into the fashion side of this, right, is that, I feel like sustainability is a buzzword now. Of course, we want to see more of that, but I also feel like what you're showing, and by showing your daily life and how sustainability and this kind of spirit is a part of your everyday, not just you as an individual, but that it really is the embodiment of the brand. I think that's a really neat connection to be able to take people along. There's more to it, and that spirit is really embedded in it.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think, when you hear of the word sustainable, it's kind of it seems like it's just like being overused and overdone. Sustainability, even though that's a part of on the surface, that's what you say to kind of like help people understand where you stand as a brand. But for me, I feel it has to have more depth, because the ethical component, it cannot just be something that's just on the surface, and I say this to people all the time wholeheartedly. If it was up to me, I know the most sustainable approach that I could take as a brand would be to not exist. Because at the end of the day, there is
Yeah.
more than enough everywhere. Since I do have this creativity and I need an outlet, I need an output. And I have been very fortunate to garner a group of people who believe in me, who truly, truly trust in me, to rely on me to some extent for their survival as far as their monthly or weekly or whatever sort of like income is concerned. The best thing that I could do to really truly be sustainable is not to make anything at all. And that's not a possibility because obviously, for the obvious reason. So the next thing is really to make the environment of what I create to be as sustainable as possible. And for me, that's truly in how I care and interact and connect in nature with everybody that works with me. The most sustainable approach that I have within the brand is really my team. That really trickles down to every other decisions thereafter, from the fabrics that we buy, like our approach to ensuring that we don't discard, parts. We make pouches, we make any little intricate things that we include as gifts in our packages, just to put that extra piece of fabric to use, because there's a lot, like when you're cutting a blouse, you're cutting a dress, there's just, whether you want to or not, there's just so much parts that can just kind of like get wasted. So in addition to taking parts that could be put to something that we turn into like a cute little intricate gift to give to our customers, I have also made it, our main responsibility once we kind of like go through the first layer of what would be considered remnants on our own. We then partner with a fabric producer to pick up those additional parts to then recycle them and make them into a new version of fabric. So in that sense, this is the most ways that we kind of like we control waste, because fashion just, it comes with, it's like it's just it is what it is. It has all these loopholes. And if you're really caring about being sustainable, I think it's truly about doing what needs to be done without just plastering sustainability as part of your brand's approach.
Yeah.
And I share all of those. I share those to show our customers, and our customers pretty much know, because everyone, when we run out of them. But like when sometimes, because we don't have time to kind of like sit and make them. We're kind of like producing on production, and we do sometimes out of the year, maybe a month or so, we don't really have the little pouches. But everyone that has purchased from us, they receive these little pouches. And even if they choose to return their garment, this is theirs to keep. It's not something that we kind of like we consider like a part of our sales. It's truly a
Mhm.
gift.
That's so lovely. I love that you're doing that. Now, you're also touching on something which I think we should make sure to talk about here. We've talked about the name of the brand and the ethos and the spirit, but how did you decide to get into this?
My mom is like such a wonderful, talented seamstress. I didn't see my calling through her. And growing up in New York, I had my own sort of like my own taste, my own knack when it came to fashion. And, I would have friends who tell me, oh, you should be a stylist, and at the time, it's kind of like in the 90s, somebody's telling you to be a stylist. You're like, you're in your late teens, early 20s. It's like, what is that? I also did a little bit of modeling and fashion, and I kind of had all these experiences and exposures, but it never really clicked, because I always felt like fashion is something truly personal, and I was confident in what I was putting together for myself. And again, because fashion was somewhat innocent at the time, like no one really looked for ways to kind of like see it as a business and monetize in it in every way. I mean, of course, if we are like a group of girls, we're heading out to the club or any sort of party, like I would be the one who's kind of like putting everybody's outfit, but I don't think I was in any right to kind of like call myself a stylist by then, because the sport didn't even exist. It wasn't until I left my profession, I started dating my husband at the time, and he was like, "Well, this is definitely something you have to tap into because you have such a great sense of fashion." By that time we were dating for some months, and I became his stylist. I was buying and like putting together all his clothes. So I guess he really had like a strong reference.
He was like, my confidence has skyrocketed. You need to do something with it.
Literally from like the socks to the shoes to like everything. I was styling him for free. So I guess his repayment was really suggesting that. But the most interesting thing is he suggested it and I took it to heart. I was kind of like at that point so fed up with my kind of like career path. So I'm like, okay, I let me start into this. But I started a store on eBay and I went into it kind of like trying different little things with like Haitian masks, like some things from Haiti, like arts and things like that. And at the time, eBay really gave you a playing field because it was so fresh and so new, and many people didn't even know what eBay was or how people buying from you from the internet. So I started that way. And then within 2 weeks, I understood that there was real potential there because the very first batch of things that I started selling, they all sold out within like in less than a week. I went to the fashion district and I went to the wholesalers and started selecting and choosing things that I felt like I would wear as a woman and I feel like other women would appreciate. I ended up turning my then living room into like literally like a little store. I ordered racks from the internet and I ordered over 200 dresses and then I established like an eBay business. And that was really such a necessity for me because it really helped me to appreciate and depreciate texture, fabrics, colors, everything, to understand seasons, to understand what's feminine, to understand the different age categories. So it really gave me an early understanding of the business part of fashion. We did that for, from 2005, and my husband eventually joined me because by then it was like a full on business. By 2013, I kind of felt like, okay, I want something different. I had two kids. I wanted to raise them in a more mild and slow paced sort of like environment. And we moved to Turkey. And, within a year, I got super bored. Not that they didn't keep me busy, but I kind of felt like, okay, is this really what I want? Do I want to come here and become a true Fanm Mon? Like, do I want to be in the farm every single day, kind of like doing these type of things and kind of like be a stay-at-home mom? So that pushed me into focusing back on fashion on with a personal sense because I felt, Turkey, it was really like dressy with all these beaded sort of like garnished dresses, or you could only go to the stores and find like jeans and t-shirts, like very slack, comfortable things. And I felt there was not really enough variety. So I started looking for the most simple dress that I could buy, and I would pair it with the bold, really exotic jewelry that I started making. That was really the initial phase that turned the name that I call myself on Facebook from Mon into like that business name. So I started making jewelry in Turkey. Shortly after that, I think within like a year or maybe a little more, I saw like some embroidery work that really was reminiscent of my childhood because in Haiti, like in school, they would show you how to do little and like little needle type of things, embroidery
Oh,
work.
yeah, like needlepoint work.
Yeah. My
Yeah.
grandmother also, like if I'm sitting next to her and, she would be giving me these little things to do because she likes to have them on her coffee table and things like that. Let me see if I could turn it into a dress. And the dressmaker happened to be in Ukraine. And that was kind of like the start of the business transitioning from the jewelry into the garments. It was with that singular dress. So by the time that I kind of like sketched the dress and posted it on IG, I sold nearly 50 dresses within that week. And then it came into me figuring out how to not refund everybody because, it was a dress that I bought for myself. I put online, everybody wanted. And then now I have this woman telling me I don't have capacity to produce these dresses. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to refund this money. Like, what are we gonna do? So I had to really work it out overnight to see what we could do. And luckily, my husband, he knew someone who was doing business, kind of like a partner who was doing business in Ukraine. And he joined him on a trip because I had also found another person who was a seamstress. And then that's the person that really started my business. She was like a little tailor who was fixing
Okay.
little making that sort of alterations. Very much like me. Natasha is just very driven. Like I didn't want to refund the money and she didn't want to let me refund the money. It was a perfect match. From the eBay days to that really set the tone of the brand for me. It thrust me into figuring things out. And most importantly, it really allowed me to have this business model that I don't think I would ever operate outside of,
Yeah.
which was to really make the orders as I received them, made to order. At the time, of course, it came with a lot of stress because it's like you in less than a week you have nearly 50 dresses that you have to send to people. So the customer service also kicked in me really being transparent. Everything for the business model was really in that particular moment in really communicating with customers and letting them know, like, I
Yeah.
am here. I am not some, fraudster who just collected your money and then who's not gonna pay you. I am here. I am making you the dress. So the openness and transparency really took shape from there on because I really started sharing videos to show them, like, I'm embroidering your dress now. Somebody is stitching it now. And I was just amazed by how people were understanding and how they kind of like they wanted to wait. They build a patient and wanted to wait and really build the anticipation of receiving their dresses. It would take me 4 to 6 weeks to make a dress. So that really, all of that really shaped my business model from how I communicate to the customer, from how open I am in telling them what the issue is. Because outside of that, many other situations arise from the fabric tones being different, the fabric density being different. And all of that really put me in a position to explain and to tell this is where we are, this is the issue, and to really bring the customer in and allow them to make their choice.
Hmm.
Because if you're supposed to receive a shade of blue from me, I have something closer, it's not quite. Then I'm allowing you to come in and to tell me which do you want instead of me just sending you something that feels as a surprise and you're upset and you're disappointed.
Yeah.
So that was really a beautiful, beautiful way, a beautiful experience. Stressful, and the business is business. It's still stressful from time to time, but I would not change it for the world. I was really blessed that also my kind of introduction going into the business, into the garment part of the business, was in the Ukraine. It wasn't like in India or in China, because I think those approaches are more factory. They're kind of like more hustle and bustle and very fast and busy. But in Ukraine, I was really surrounded by women. Like I don't know if you're familiar with Ukraine, but the women are really the workers. And I kind of felt somehow this was also very similar to the structure in Haiti, because
Yeah.
mainly like in Haiti, of course, you have some men that work. In Ukraine, of course, you have some men that work, but it's really the women who carry all the weight, who kind of like keeps the family together, who keeps the job, who does it. So it's kind of like in another way, in my sort of like adulthood, I was brought back into a different culture, but really things that felt familiar to me. Like it was reminiscent of me as a little girl being around my aunts, being around my neighbors. So I was put into that environment and build that environment within the Ukraine team. It really clarified for me going forward, this is the only way. Now, being in Turkey, it's completely different. It's something that I needed to readapt into because much like India or China or anywhere that you do mass production, the culture is very different as far as production is concerned. It's very machine-like, it's very robotic, like it's straight line. And in my business, it's very hands-on, it's very
Yeah.
touchy-feely, and that's what I like. And now I'm in a space where I'm very fortunate that the people working for me, because we also had to go through the process of filtering. Because another thing is, you may think you're giving somebody your best because this is the healthier way to function and operate in a workspace. But some people they cannot take that because they prefer to just go into the factory setting because that's all they know. That's what they prefer even. It's been nearly 5 years since we transitioned into Turkey. And, it's kind of, I think I've matured into that to understand just because I deem something to be really better for someone, they're an adult, they have to kind of like appreciate it on their terms. And if that's not that, then we kind of like we accept and we move on. I know I answered you. I gave you a pretty lengthy answer. So since you said you were
No,
gonna edit,
no, that's all wonderful to hear. And you in talking about that, because I was already going to ask you, obviously you have your own, you've traveled, right? You have a lot of global influence in your own life. That obviously plays into the brand, but then also hearing about all of the folks who are involved in your brand who are also maybe, I mean, you can speak to this better now than I, but over time at least have been involved from different places around the world. Well, how does all of that global influence play into the physical design of your pieces?
the most beautiful thing that I've come to realize personally in my travels, personally also growing up in the Caribbean, I really realized how, the globe is really a singular entity, a monolithic entity, if I may. Culture to culture, there might be some differences in cooking, but if you go to a country, their culture is making rice and beans, and you're coming from a culture that makes rice and beans, it's gonna hit the same. So I think, the more I travel, the more I kind of understand how very much alive and present and vibrant nature is. It may be that a flower's shade is different, the leaf patterns are somewhat different, but all in all, it's kind of like it's all the same. And I think that's what makes us very different, but very similar at the same time. The way that plays into my designs and my creative approach is really seeing the similarities and appreciating the differences and really allow myself to be a sponge, to really allow what feels familiar to maybe gives me a form of comfort, but to also remain very curious about the differences because that's where the learning comes. If I'm in Hawaii or in a different part of like Asia and I'm looking at a flower that looks similar to something in the Caribbean, I will, of course, see that and notice that and appreciate that. But it's really the difference that's going to trigger me to be more curious and see how I could then translate that into my own. And I think, looking at my brand, its own element, the femininity presence, colors and details of it, I think is really universal as well. So that's why, it doesn't matter if you're someone who's living in Barbados versus if you're like in Florida or even if you're in New York or somewhere in the Hamptons for that matter, like that same dress would still resonate. And I think it's really the interlocking approach that continues to keep me inspired because when you say nature is your main source of inspiration, how can you really differentiate?
Touching on that, I mean, so what sorts of things do inspire you personally?
It's really learning because sometimes you may think and that's the trick with the similarities as well because you may see something on surface or from a distance and think you already know. And then when you dive in, you understand, it's something completely different. That sort of like openness to continue to be curious is really what keeps me inspired to really be appreciative for our differences is really what keeps me inspired. In Creole, we have this thing that says if you go to somebody's house, you see them standing on one foot, you stand on one foot, you know? So I think as you travel more and more, you do understand how very much alike we are, but you have to have enough humility and respect to do as respectful as possible. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of already touched on it before, so I probably made that more complicated than it needed to be. But I think that's wonderful. One of the things I wanted to ask you, because I'm looking at the clock and I don't want to miss my opportunity, is that prior to coming on here, you and I were both talking about current events. One of those things is tariffs.
Hmm.
Obviously, as an international company, that is something that is impacting you personally. I want to give you the opportunity to talk about what that means.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. As we kind of like tapped on earlier, when it comes to the tariffs, initially, like the first thing that came to mind was how can we create a cushion for our customer, and particularly with our business model, given the fact that we continue to produce everything that we create. So it's not like we don't have a collection that's just shown and then it goes into oblivion. Like it continues to be produced singularly or in a wholesale model. It's always very difficult for us on normal terms to consider raising the prices of something that has been on the website for a year, for 5 years, for 8 years, because sometimes people do take their time to make a decision to buy something. And when they finally do, like I wouldn't want them to kind of like have that really shock or surprise moment to see the prices gone up. So we've made the decision, as of now, hopefully things will not need to change, but as of now, to not raise our prices. I feel very fortunate that even though we are affected, we're not in the position of many brands, sadly, who are only producing in China, even though it definitely has touched us, it has hit us. We've made the decision as a brand to not reflect our prices, whether it's on our DTC, from our website directly, and also for our wholesalers. And, this could change because we don't know how this is going to catapult. But for now, this is where we are, and really hoping to have some form of support for our wholesalers, and particularly because our prices, everything that we produce remains on our website. I would say, like, I use the word permanently loosely, but it's kind of like on the website permanently. So really to ensure that our wholesalers are not feeling it's necessary to change their prices, we will not be changing our prices. We wouldn't want someone to go, let's say, on a platform that carries the line to see one price and then they come on our site to see another price. I don't know if you're familiar with the Seven Seas. We're kind of like a part of that network, and I have extended this sort of like offering. Like, if there are any brands that are maybe scrambling at the moment, they're mainly or only producing in China and they don't know how they're going to figure things out. Maybe for temporary purposes, we could, try to alleviate to some extent their orders. Like if they have any urgent orders that, is with needing to go out the door, or if they need to kind of like reconsider having a different structure in their production. I feel very fortunate that we have our own place here, and we're, I guess, a little bit outside of that, even though we are inside of it. We're very fortunate. We're very fortunate.
Well, before we close out, if you could just let people know, and I will also preface this by saying that we will put links in the show notes of the episode so people can access it. But if they're listening right now and they're not clicking in there, where can they find you to shop, to follow along online?
Yeah, well, we are on Facebook and Instagram under Fanm Mon, and also on our website, www.femmon.com.
Perfect. Well, this has been, I feel full. My heart feels full. I have so enjoyed this conversation. I thank you for not only the work that you're doing, but for sharing it with our audience and me today. And I can't wait to continue to follow along.